It's sharp 6 o'clock. So let's get started. Welcome everybody, and special welcome to you, Joe Hagel. I think this is a tremendous gift we have today to having you, and it was actually even the title of a post I did in LinkedIn in the invitation, because I think we have really a tremendous opportunity in this iteration, the 4D conversations. I thought of presenting you briefly and then getting your help to present yourself when we start. So today will be me and Casimiro. You see that's why we have this background. So we're going to be moderating, as usual, for this conversation. Post questions at any time in the chat. And then we will have first, Pete from you on narratives and your latest book. And they have discussions after about half an hour or so, depending on the time you need, John Hay. And if I present first this community that I think maybe I see some new faces. So 4D stands for Dreamers, Doers, Designers, and Doubters. And there is a community that we have been very active since a little bit more than a year. Mainly focus, we are passionate in understanding the meta crisis. We believe that just as 20 years ago or a little bit more, we have very fragmented, save the whales, save the forests, and then we came to the conclusion that it was climate change, so that we have something today that's the meta crisis, and things are very interconnected and very complex. Another thought that I have, and why it's such a gift we have you today, is that in this very complex world we have today, it's really a battle of narratives. Right? In one side, we have the MAGA and a lot of other stuff going on, sometimes very simple narratives. And then we have this very complex narrative that in some way we need to convey. So I think this is the centerpiece of our challenge. And as I said, it's a gift, Joe, because you've always been a person that I admired so much in my work back at Ericsson. So I remember, just as an anecdote, I worked in the strategy department, so it was all the way from the CU actually, asking for what other business models we could think at Ericsson, right? And I start really, sweating, because the only thing I could think is, okay, maybe we could lease equipment, but that was his own idea. So I used a paper you wrote with, I think, 9 or so, or 12 even, uh, business models that I could use as a framework. A beautiful paper, and that really became a good work and very appreciated at Ericsson at that time. And then all the thinking about scalable learning, and also later on narratives versus stories, which will be very much together with your book, The Journey Beyond Fear, the core of today. So with and I mean, when I looked at Wikipedia and your profile, I see things like you started the Center for the Edge at Deloitte, at the board at Santa Fe Institute, faculty of Singularity. So I mean, really capturing the how to say, a lot of also the Silicon Valley and the centers of innovation we have in the world. Is that a good description? But you, yeah. And Kazi, did I forget anything? Of course, one thing is cameras on, if possible. That's really nice. And anything else missing?
Right before we start, I will share this as well in our chat. Please include questions in the chat so later on we can have a conversation about those questions with John Hagel. And please be muted to avoid background noises and respectful communications as always. Thank you very much, and welcome, John, for this conversation.
Thank you.
So should I start or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, you gave a little bit of my bio. I would say that relevant to this, I've been in Silicon Valley now for over 40 years, 44 years. I was the founder of two tech startups. I was a senior executive with Atari in the video game business, for those who can remember that. I was a partner at McKinsey and Company for 16 years, opened up their Silicon Valley office for them, and then was with Deloitte and founded the research center, the Center for the Edge, which captured a lot of the research that I've been doing. But I retired from there about 4 years ago and continuing to do consulting and speaking and writing, and passionate about my latest book. I've written 8 books, so I'm a passionate writer. But the most recent one, as Geraldo mentioned, was The Journey Beyond Fear. And that's really driving me at this point. I'm in the early stages of creating a new center that will offer programs based on the book. So I want to help people move beyond fear. So I would say that one way of characterizing my journey in my career is I was trained as a business strategist. I was trained that if you have the right strategy, you win. That's what you focus on. And over the years, I've actually become increasingly convinced that psychology is more important than strategy. That if we don't understand the emotions that are shaping the choices and actions of the people we're dealing with, the best strategy is just going to sit on a shelf somewhere and never be implemented. So that's become increasingly my focus: is what are the emotions? How can we cultivate emotions that will help us to have more impact, that's meaningful? And I would say my passion throughout my career has been anticipating large emerging opportunities and motivating people to address those opportunities. I wrote my first book back in 1976, and it was on alternative energy technologies, wind, solar, hydrogen, nuclear fusion, a little bit ahead of my time. But it was this passion to look ahead, see the future, see new opportunities, and motivating people to address them. But over the years, I found that there was growing resistance. When I would talk about these opportunities, people would kind of back off and not want to pursue them. And was trying to understand what was driving that resistance. And that was where I became more focused on the emotion of fear. I was finding that people were driven by fear. And specifically, I should say, when I talk about fear, I'm talking about the fear of the future. When you look into the future, do you see it primarily as a threat or as an opportunity? And I think more and more people around the world are seeing the future as very threatening, very scary. I don't want to go there. I'm just going to hold on to what I have. And I think it's understandable as an emotion. Again, I've done a lot of research on this. And one area of research is the long-term trends that are reshaping the global economy and society. And I call it the big shift. But one of the dimensions of the big shift is mounting performance pressure on all of us. It takes many different forms. It's intensifying competition on a global scale. It is accelerating pace of change. Things we thought we could count on are no longer there. And then, as if that weren't enough, because of all the connectivity we've created, a small event in a faraway place in the world quickly cascades into an extreme disruptive event, leaving us all scrambling to figure out what to do. Dare I mention the pandemic as just one example of that kind of disruptive event. But any one of those would be, um, it's easy to be afraid. But if all three are coming together, I think, again, it's very understandable that fear is becoming an increasingly prevalent emotion around the world. Um, but while it's understandable, I think it's also very limiting as an emotion. If you're driven by fear,
You don't want to look into the future. You just want to focus on today. You become very risk averse. You don't want to take any risk, any chances. You lose trust in others because things are so scary. I can't depend on anyone else. It has to just be me, and I'll do it myself and somehow make it through. Um, so I think that that's the challenge is it's a understandable but very limiting emotion. And so my research increasingly has been on how to overcome fear and cultivate other emotions that will help us to have more impact that's meaningful. And that's where my book, The Journey Beyond Fear, comes in. It captures my most recent research. But in the context of that, I'm providing this as background and context to the focus of our discussion today, which is I've become very drawn to the power of narratives as a way to move beyond fear. Um, but here I need to distinguish. I think many of you have heard this distinction, but the distinction for me, when I talk about narratives, everybody says, "Oh, you're talking about stories." And I say, "No, I'm not talking about stories. I think even though most people view them as the same thing, I make an important distinction. For me, stories are self-contained. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end. The end, the story is over. And the story is about me, the storyteller, or it's about some other people, real or imagined, but it's not about you. You can use your imagination and figure out what you would have done in that story, but it's not about you. In contrast, for me, a narrative, number one, is open ended. There is no resolution yet. There's some kind of big threat or opportunity out in the future, not clear if it's going to be achieved or not. And the resolution of the narrative hinges on you. It's a call to action to say your choices, your actions are going to help determine how this narrative plays out. What's it going to be? And so I think um, it has, and unfortunately, I go into a little bit of detail, but not all the detail. It's in the book. But um, first of all, I make a distinction between threat-based narratives and opportunity-based narratives. So, what is the view of the future? Is it primarily a threat, or is it primarily an opportunity? And I think that, unfortunately, in my view, in the world today, threat based narratives are becoming increasingly prevalent. Everybody is trying to motivate others through fear. I mean, my just one simple example is I ask people when you watch a news program, when was the last time you heard a good news story? It's all about terrible things that have happened, people that have died, more are going to die. It's terrible. And so I think that it's unfortunate that we have such a focus on the future as very threatening. And I'll go into a little more detail on that later. But um, I've become a strong proponent of the need to cultivate, to capture and articulate opportunity-based narratives that will help us to move beyond fear and generate excitement. Um, and in that context, uh, again, this is based on research I've done, but effective opportunity-based narratives have four components to them. One is they give a very inspiring view of a long-term opportunity out in the future. Very exciting, big, more than we've ever seen before. That's the opportunity. Second element is what are the trends that make this opportunity likely or feasible? I mean, is this just a fantasy or are there reasons to believe that this opportunity might be achieved or not? And then third element is what are the barriers and obstacles that are preventing us from getting to that opportunity? What needs to be addressed and overcome to address the opportunity? Um, and then finally, there's the call to action. What is your call to action to others? What action do they need to take? Do we all need to take? I think one of the big things about opportunity based narratives is they bring people together. They can unite people around something that really excites them and motivates them to take action together. So that to me, whenever I look at a narrative, I try to assess how much of those four elements are present, because in my experience, they all need to be present to be an effective narrative. um, and then to complicate life, there are many different levels of narratives. Again, based on research, I believe that we all, as individuals, have a personal narrative. Very few of us have made the effort to articulate it to ourselves, much less reflect on it to see if it's a good narrative to help us accomplish what we want. Um, but the two key questions that the personal narrative raises is, what's your view of the future? Is it primarily threat or opportunity? And then what's your call to action to others? Do you have a call to action to others? Because I think in my experience, most people, when they reflect on it, start to see their view of the future as more and more threat based, and they're not having call to action to others because, again, they're losing trust. They don't know if they can depend on others, so they don't have a call to action to others. And so it can be a nice catalyst to say, is this the right narrative for me? Are there other narratives that I could cultivate, develop, that would help me to achieve more impact that's meaningful to me and bring me together with others? So that's the personal narrative. Um, there's also organizational narratives. And here's a huge opportunity that I believe most companies have not tapped into. And I'll give an example in a minute. But so there's organizational narratives, there's geographic narratives, narratives for cities, for regions, for countries, that can really have an impact. And then to make life even more complicated, a fourth level of narrative is movement narratives. Every movement for change can and should have a narrative that will invite people and bring people together. So let me just quickly go through a couple of examples to make this a little more concrete. I mentioned organizational narratives. Again, in my experience, very few, if any, companies or organizations have a narrative that they've articulated and communicated to the stakeholders that they have. One example that I have, which is from Silicon Valley, is in the early days of Apple Computer. Steve Jobs came up with a narrative which was condensed into the slogan of "Think Different." But when you unpack the slogan, it was, for the first time in history, we have digital technology that can allow us to express our unique potential and individuality, but we're in a world that is dominated by technology that has taken away our names, given us numbers, put us in cubicles, made us cogs in a machine. This is very challenging to move away from that environment to this new environment. And what do you need to do? The call to action was think different. If you can force yourself to think different and start to break the mold that's been created for you, you can accomplish amazing things. I think it's the reason why, for many people, Apple became the equivalent of a religion. It spoke to such a deep aspiration that people had, and it was speaking to them. It wasn't about Apple. Yes, on the side, they would say Apple has some products and devices that can help you, but no, it's about you. You need to think different. Will you think different? Um, And so I think, and another piece to the puzzle here is that I believe that's one of the key reasons that Apple was able to build such a broad ecosystem of third parties, software developers and other hardware developers, because they were excited about this narrative of thinking different and helping people to think different. So they joined in and started innovating and creating products of their own. So anyway, I use that as an example of the untapped opportunity, and I would welcome if you see other companies that that have good narratives, effective narratives. So I'm searching for them. Um, geographic narratives. Here, I go back to my Silicon Valley roots. Many people ask me, well, how do you explain the continued success of Silicon Valley over so many decades? And for many people, when they get that question, they will answer about, well, the venture capitalists, the universities, the infrastructure that's here. I don't want to dismiss that, but in my experience, the thing that has driven the continued success of Silicon Valley is a compelling geographic narrative. That for the first time, we have digital technology that is exponentially improving price performance over time, and can change the world for the better. But it's not going to happen automatically. You need to come to Silicon Valley. Will you come to Silicon Valley? And it's the reason most people don't realize it, but the majority of successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley were not born in the United States, much less in Silicon Valley. They came from all over the world because they were so excited about this opportunity to change the world for the better using this creative new technology. So again, I just I think that's an interesting example of a geographic narrative that can draw talent and people to a specific place to create things together. Um, and then I mentioned movements as another level of narratives. And here we have a lot of movements for social change throughout the world. But my experience is that virtually every movement we have today is driven by a threat based narrative. The enemy's coming to get us. We're all going to die. We need to mobilize now and resist, or we're going to die. The world is collapsing. We're going to die. It's feeding the fear. Where's the opportunity? What's the amazing opportunity if we all came together? What could we accomplish? And here I won't go into detail, but I've studied social movements throughout history in all different parts of the world. And one of the things I found was the most successful movements for social change throughout all periods of history, all parts of the world, the most successful movements for social change were driven by an opportunity based narrative. So I think it's something we should reflect on if we're participating in movements or trying to organize movements. What is the opportunity based narrative that could really draw people together and create excitement for action? So it's I've gone through a lot here. I just hopefully you can see that I'm excited about the untapped potential of opportunity based narratives. And in this context, I want to go back. I talked earlier about the big shift and the mounting performance pressure that's being created by the big shift. I love paradox. And one of the interesting paradoxes is that um, at the same time these forces are creating mounting performance pressure, they are also creating exponentially expanding opportunity. We can create far more value with far less resource, far more quickly than would have been imaginable a few decades ago. Exponentially expanding opportunity. But the challenge is if we're driven by fear, we can't even see those opportunities, much less be motivated to pursue them. So my belief is we have the opportunity to really unleash that potential of the big shift, which is exponentially expanding opportunity. And actually, just before I finish, I'll quickly also mention another theme in the book, because I talk about moving from fear to other emotions. I've become very focused on a specific emotion, again, based on research, that I call the passion of the explorer. And I believe that if we all as human beings have that potential within us, but very few of us have made the effort to find it, much less pursue it as part of our lives. And so I believe that we all need to look for that passion of the explorer and pursue it and cultivate it. And that will help us to overcome any fear, ourselves and hopefully others. So anyway, let me stop there. I could go on for hours, but I know that it's a good good conversation to be had here.
John, I'm thinking the other elements of your book is, like you said, passion, right? And
Yes.
that's the distinction. I mean, the passion of the discovery. There is a short clip with Steve Jobs that I think is really nice, where he says if there is one attribute when hiring people, is passion, because it's so difficult, people will give up. It's very, very nice. I think it's a clip. He's together with Bill Gates, and they're discussing this. But what I'm also think the other element, if you can expand a little bit, is about platforms, right? So in your book, you talk about narratives and key, I think is the start, but then the passion and the passion that can be sustained, right? And then the platform, and you talk particularly about learning platforms. So I'm just, before we open up for, and I see already raised hands, can we explore a little bit of these concepts?
Sure, happy to do that. So again, the challenge is I use words that most people you nod their heads, and when I talk about platforms, they say, "Oh, yeah, we know platforms. The world is run by platforms." Um, I believe there's an untapped opportunity, which is to develop a very different kind of platform from anything that exists today, and it's what I call a learning platform. But here, again, I have to be careful because when I talk about learning, most executives say, "Oh, you're talking about training programs. So we're going to have a platform where we can offer training programs virtually online." No, that's not what I'm talking about. I believe in a world that's rapidly changing, the most important and necessary form of learning is not sharing existing knowledge, which is what training programs are all about. It's sharing what you already know to others. The learning that is most necessary and valuable in this big shift world is learning in the form of creating new knowledge that never existed before. And by that does not occur in a training room. It occurs out in the workspace as you address situations that have never been seen before and find ways to deal with them, to address them. And so my belief is there is a need, a growing need for a learning platform where the primary design goal is to help all the participants to learn faster in the form of creating new knowledge, not just sharing existing knowledge. What would that platform look like? And again, without going into too much detail, I've become uh, convinced by looking at learning situations that the most powerful way to learn in the form of creating new knowledge is to come together into small groups. I call them impact groups, but typically it's anywhere between 3 to 15 people who come together and share a passion and excitement about having more and more impact in a specific area and are driven to learn on how to have more and more of that impact. And so in my view, these learning platforms, the core unit of the platform would be these small work groups, impact groups that are coming together and helping them to connect and stay connected, but then connecting them more broadly so they can scale their impact and scale their learning even more over time. So that's my view on learning platforms.
We will for sure come back to that later on because we have already a couple of questions about that. Fascinating, John. I have lots of questions myself, but let me before I summarize some of the things that have been said, and I will open for others to talk. Let's start with the raised hands already. So we have Johan first.
Yes, thank you, John. It was amazing to hear this directly from you, sort of. And I raised my hand before you started to talk about learning platforms, but that's also a very interesting part. And I think there's actually two types of knowledge that we are collectively not good at. One is creating new knowledge, as you pointed at. But there's also a knowledge or competence to deal with the unknown, which is actually even harder, especially for corporations. Right? And I think that's another complement to that. But my main observation or comment is about fear-based narratives. One of the, to me, or since I'm based in Sweden, sort of one of the narratives that we still remember in Sweden is, go west to the Americas. That was like over 100 years ago when there was a big famine in Sweden and a lot of migrants left for, to the unknown across the Atlantic and whatever. And yes, that was an opportunity-based type of narrative. It will be much better once you cross the Atlantic, but it's also a threat-based affair because it's not sustainable to stay where we are at, right? And I think that's a useful component, sort of, but it also touches upon a fear-based narrative. Any thoughts around that?
Wow. Yes. No, it's a great question on many levels. I think I address your question about U.S. narrative and then something else. But for the U.S. narrative, I think again it raises the complexity of narratives in the sense that it's not purely opportunity. It's not just there's huge opportunity, let's go for it. It's recognition there are obstacles and barriers that are going to prevent us from achieving those opportunities. So yes, that can be viewed as threat. It can be viewed as negative, but it's the reason there is a call to action. If you don't have barriers or obstacles, just sit back. Let's have a beer. Let's celebrate. These opportunities are going to come together and we're going to all have a wonderful time. So, in the context of the narrative for the US, it was, the barrier or obstacle is that if you stay where you are, you're not going to achieve as much as you could. There is a land of opportunity over in the US where you can achieve a lot more, but you have to move. You can't just sit there. You have to move. Will you move? And so, um, again, I think it's a balancing act, but the primary focus is on the opportunity to motivate and excite people and recognize, yes, there are barriers that can generate fear or,
Yes.
frustration, um, but I also wanted to just quickly mention, you talked about what's required to address new knowledge. And I think there's an important distinction, again, based on my experience with companies. Um, the learning that most companies focus on is skill-based learning. What skills does a worker need and how can we provide them with that skill? The challenge, and here again, there's semantics, so definitions may vary, but in my experience, skills are valuable in a specific context. How to operate this machine in this factory, how to do this kind of calculation in this process. But it's only valuable in that context. It doesn't have any relevance anywhere else. The interesting thing to me, and again, I've become a strong proponent of the learning we need is not so much around skills, it's around what I call capabilities, which are things that are valuable in every context. And I start with the notion of curiosity. That's an important capability, asking the right questions, collaboration, coming together with other people to address those questions, creativity, imagination. Those are valuable in every context, but there's very little effort to really cultivate those. And in fact, I would say, again, I'm being a bit provocative here, but in my experience, most large companies view curiosity as a liability. You're asking too many questions. Why don't you just read the manual? Read the manual again. It's all there. Asking too many questions is a sign of weakness, that you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. Um, so again, I think that we need to realize that curiosity is becoming increasingly essential to creating new knowledge. If you don't ask the right questions, good luck. You're not going to learn.
Yeah, perhaps curiosity goes against your other concept of scalable efficiency, which is the old way of running
Yes.
companies, not about
Yeah.
scalable learning.
Just quickly, I make a distinction between two different organizational models or institutional models. I believe all large organizations around the world today are driven by a model of scalable efficiency. The model is do things faster and cheaper, and that's the key to success. Scalable efficiency. I believe that model is becoming increasingly inefficient, and the model that needs to replace it is scalable learning. And here again, I'm talking about learning in the form of creating new knowledge, not training programs. How can we cultivate within every person in the company, not just in the research labs or innovation centers, but in every department of the company, cultivate that learning so that they can deliver more and more value to the people that matter to them. So
Fascinating. Thank you. We have more questions. Mayan, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, John, and thank you very much. Very interesting to hear about your books and about your very extensive experience. I fully agree. Well, first of all, on this last point on curiosity, I have to say, where I've been working for the last 20 years, it was very much encouraged to be curious, ask questions, and think out of the box. But that wasn't what I wanted to get to. My question is really, I mean, I fully agree with you that fear is very limiting. But if we look at reality and not just a few hundred years ago, but rather today, what we're facing, especially here in this part of Europe, we have a war going on next door. It's been going on for 3 years, over 3 years. We have people dying, losing legs, arms, everything you can imagine every day. We have, you know, we're asked and requested to be prepared for, if not war, a crisis. At the same time, we hear from your part of the world a complete turnaround. The country we thought was our closest ally and now turned out not to be our ally. And personally, I'm extremely sad, of course, as we all are. But I think Europe will tackle this and get out of this stronger. But I'd like to hear from you. You know, in theory, I fully agree with you about the negativity of this emotion. But how, in reality, do we manage to steer away and to still have a positive approach in this extremely difficult context? And where at least we are, you know, every politician, every neighbor you talk to, every person you meet is talking about some of the events I just mentioned, be it in the workplace, be it anywhere. So, yeah, you know, just to bring it kind of very kind of hands-on situation, because I believe, you know, we have to function in the situation we are. Thanks a lot.
great question again, and could go on for hours on it for sure. But I would say my starting point would be, you know, yes, there's an again understandable fear. There are bad things happening throughout the world. The question I ask is, who do you know that wants to live in fear? Do you know anybody who desires or aspires to live in fear? I don't know anyone. I think we all, as human beings, have a hunger for hope and excitement. Who is addressing that? And I think ultimately, again, I'm a bit of an optimist. I believe by focusing on opportunity, we can address all the major challenges and threats that we have in our world today. But it's coming back to the questions, fundamental questions, you know, when we are at war, why are we at war? What are the things that are driving the war? And what could we do to really inspire people to come together instead of fighting each other, come together with each other? And I know that's a bit of a uh, uh, challenge, but I do think that ultimately we need to go to the fundamental question of why are all these things happening, and what alternative view of the world could we develop that would bring us together and motivate us to actually work together to achieve much better things rather than fight each other. And I don't know. It's yeah, I'll stop there. I don't know.
Let me see one. I had a comment before related to that, and I'll come back to the comments in a moment. But I had a comment that there are studies that show that the use of the fear of losing things is 4 times more powerful than the one of winning, and perhaps they are taking full advantage of that, the bad guys. I don't know. It would be interesting to see if there's any correlation between this loss of fear of losing things and the usage in certain narrative.
No.
We have one more question from Bjorn, then I will go to a summary of what has been said, and then we have some more questions as well from Geraldo and some others. Let's go on here.
Right.
Hello, John. I think I was one of those that sent in a little bit of narrative, but since I am also an author, a poet, and a storyteller, I decided to go that way. But I wanted to ask, and my take on that and the hope is really that since we are in a crisis, it was more about all the archives, all the libraries, everything that's being destroyed. There is a kind of a call for action to save that. And I think it's pretty serious. I'm thinking almost to the sense of Fahrenheit 451. So it is a threat, but it's also an opportunity and a call for action where something good might come out in the end after passing, because you have to have the hope to be able to go through the crisis. And that also goes back to something which actually triggered me, and I had a lot of discussion with Geraldo on that one, and that is the word crisis, which we always take the negative approach to. But if you go back to the Greek origin of crisis or krisis with a K, it means both the fear and the opportunity. So with every time there's a crisis, there's opportunity for something new. So I think this is where we have to get this optimism. What do you think about that line of thinking? Because I think it's good to think about all the negative think and see where is the opportunity in that.
Yeah, no, it's great. I do love the paradox when words can mean different things
Yeah.
at the same time. I do think, again, in the concept of narrative that I've been articulating, there is this balance between, on the one hand, opportunity, and on the other hand, the obstacles and barriers that are preventing us from achieving that opportunity. So again, I'm a strong believer that you shouldn't be just purely an optimist or purely a pessimist. You have to really combine the two and be excited about the opportunity, but know that it's not going to happen automatically and needs to be addressed through action. And so I think that that's what's ultimately going to be required. And I'll just say again, I like to be provocative a bit, but I think that certainly in the issue of climate and other issues in the world today, one of the popular terms is sustainability. We need to go to a sustainable world, or regeneration. We need to regenerate, or a circular economy. We need a circular economy. And my response to that is, really? Is that all we need and want? Is to go back to where we were, sustain what we have, not develop anything further, not create any more value? Really? I think that's part of the challenge, is the opportunity that's being identified. It's not all that exciting and inspiring. Just keep what we have. Versus, no, if we all came together, we could create much more value and much more impact with less negative impact on this ecology, on the world, on the climate, whatever. There's opportunity for innovation to create much more for all of us. Why do we just want to sustain what we have? Really? I don't know.
Very interesting. And going to the chat here, we have a fascinating conversation as well, very similar to the things that we have been asking about fear-based versus opportunity-based narratives, and some other questions about the situation of Apple and what was part of their narratives and the use of that. Some of the risks of fear, uncertainty, and doubt approaches. I have one question before we move forward to others. I had one question that has to do more with the exercise that we have done. We have shared with you a number of different narratives. And the 40s, when we started that, we started thinking about how can we cope with the meta crisis. And that's, in essence, a risk-based or threat-based approach. But we have tried to build or write opportunity-based narratives in this case. But as you probably have noticed, they also differ quite a lot. So there are like in different directions. Is it possible to have individual narratives aligned with a group narrative or something like that? How do you see that situation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think, again, it's complicated in terms of the reality, but I believe that the narratives can be layered within each other so that, I talked about personal narrative that can be layered within a organizational narrative, can be layered within a geographic narrative, can be layered within a movement narrative, and maybe all of them. But the key is, are the narratives consistent with each other, or are they opposing each other? Because ultimately the key to success is finding ways, opportunities that build on each other, and that the more we achieve in this area, the more we're going to achieve in that area. And let's keep going. This is going to be bigger and bigger and better over time. So it's a challenge. I don't want to say it's easy, but I do believe that narratives can be more focused on for specific individuals, specific organizations, whatever. Yeah.
And connecting that with the force of passion and pull that you have also mentioned in other places, it's way of each of the narratives becomes a passion for that group or that.
Yes. Yes. Again, I believe the narratives, opportunity-based narratives, can be a significant catalyst to draw out the passion of the explorer within people. And that's part of the reason I think they can be so powerful and valuable, is they tap into something that we all as human beings have. I will also say, I get a lot of pushback from people saying, when I talk about passion of the explorer, they say, oh, come on, John. Some of us are capable of passion, but most of us just want to be told what to do and have the security of an income. We want security. My response to that is, let's go to a playground and let's look at children 5 or 6 years old. Show me one that isn't excited about exploring new areas and coming together with others to explore them. Curiosity, imagination, creativity. We all had it as human beings. What happened? We went to school and we were taught, listen to the teacher, memorize what the teacher has to say, and then show that you memorized it on the exams. And that was to prepare us for the work environment, where it's listen to the boss, memorize the manual, and just do it as specified. So I believe, again, we all within us have that passion. It's been crushed in us, but it's still there and waiting to be drawn out. And I think, again, opportunity-based narratives can be a significant catalyst to draw out this passion and bring us together.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Geraldo.
Yeah, I just want to amplify. There was a question from Mayan before on the situation with Europe, and also you described about sustainability. And in the introduction, I think I just want to amplify that I think we have a war on narratives today in the world. So when you have MAGA or you have VLLC in Argentina with Milei or Bolsonaro in Brazil and so on and so forth, these guys are offering a narrative that's so simplistic. right? And on the other hand, we have, like you mentioned, Greta with all her good pursuit, but very, very fear-based, right? I'm making a little bit dramatic here to make the point. Daniel Schmeidenberger, where we also very much admire in the area of meta crisis, but you can feel almost to jump out of the window after listening. So I think, let's say, to the question of Europe, it's not enough to think we'll come back. What is the narrative? There is a brain drain, as you know, John Hagel, from the universities now, Harvard, Columbia. They're in big crisis, right? The government has taken over Columbia University and so forth. So there is an opportunity for brain drain here. What's the narrative for that? How to capture that opportunity? So I think if you are not even sometimes street smart, we're going to be in trouble here. So that's my simple view. I just want to amplify. But we have more
Good.
questions. Yes.
Love questions.
What was the next one?
Well, I can jump in if that's okay.
Yes.
Steve here, sitting in Paris, enjoying this discussion. Ellen, you started out talking about strategy, story, and narrative. Make sure we understood the difference and the power of narrative because it related on a psychological level, which, if I understood correctly, was was deeper and more personal and more. It would allow people to act, and you use the word pursue, and you would kind of get more out of the framework of narrative than strategy, or at least the way we used to think about strategy. So I have two questions for you. The first is there an organization that has kind of transformed itself from old strategy making, strategic thinking with those tools, with those frameworks, to the kind of opportunity-based narrative thinking that you represent? Can you give an example of that?
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of great examples. One that I use that is interesting on many levels, but it's a Chinese company. It's called Li and Feng, and they're in the apparel industry, clothing industry. They've been in existence for over 100 years. And throughout most of their history, they were basically a deal maker. They would connect an apparel designer in the West with a factory in China, negotiate a contract, and collect a commission for it. Done. Back in the 1970s, two brothers took over the company and saw that the commissions were shrinking. They were getting less and less on each of the deals. And so they started to say, well, we need to think of something different. What's the big opportunity? And they ended up looking ahead into, and I can go into this in more detail, but there's an approach to strategy that I call zoom out, zoom in that I think is very relevant here. But they, without knowing it, pursued this kind of strategy. They looked ahead into the future, saw a huge opportunity that in a global apparel industry that was becoming more and more complex and fast moving, there was a real need for a trusted advisor to work with the apparel designers, getting to know them extremely well and connecting them with a broader and broader range of expertise and capabilities around the world. Long story short, they created a network of 50,000 partners around the world. Vast majority of them not in China. They were global. And they focused on getting to know the apparel designers extremely well and becoming more and more effective at connecting them with the relevant expertise and capabilities wherever in the world they needed it. Hugely successful. They exploded in revenue. They billions of dollars of revenue, huge return on equity. But the interesting thing is there's a negative side to this story, which is in the early 2000s, the Li and Feng started to hire some Western executives to run the company. And those Western executives said, wait a minute, all these partners of ours are generating all this revenue from the connections we're establishing with them. Why don't we just build a business to do this work instead of one of our partners? And long story short, they started building these business units that were competing with the partners in their network. Guess what? The partners in the network started to lose trust and said, wait a minute, are you our partner or our competitor? And they started to lose revenue at a significant rate. But I think it was they had this opportunity-based narrative, which was that apparel designers around the world could create much more value by connecting on a global scale in much more flexible ways than traditional business offered. So
Just a second question, if no one else has their hand up. I worked in executive education with Geraldo and know some of the people in this chat. That was 10, 15 years ago. And in our company, purpose was quite a word, an individual purpose, a company's purpose. And it was quite exciting, I think, for people to use certain tools and then share their own articulation of their purpose. And that seemed to be the word. That was the pursuit to really define it. But then I think, I don't know how widespread this was, but, like everything else, you can overuse these words and they lose saliency. And then another word comes in. And for a while there, I think impact and purpose is fine. But, I can have a purpose, but am I really making an impact? And what is the impact that I'm making? And when I hear the word narrative, I really relate that better to impact, because ultimately the challenge for me is to move towards, that opportunity to do something, to pursue, as you said. But my question in terms of language and your experience with working with cultures, what words are hot today? What words are salient today? I think if you went into Ericsson, our old company, and talked about purpose, people would not be very excited anymore. Maybe I don't know. That's just kind of an observation from a war. But what words do excite people?
Oh man, good question too. But I'll again be a bit provocative here, and I think one of the words that is exciting executives today is transformation. I guarantee that in virtually every company and large company around the world, there is a digital transformation program. And when I probe underneath to find out what's in this program, what is it? It's basically taking digital technology and applying it to what we've always done and making it faster and cheaper. I use, for transformation, I use the metaphor of the caterpillar and the butterfly. That's transformation. If you're just making the caterpillar walk faster, that may help the caterpillar. The caterpillar may be grateful, but it's not transformation. Please don't use that word. But again, I think it's this notion of we need to use these words, but attach very different meanings to them, so that we reduce risk, minimize risk. And in this world, we just want to use digital technology to do what we've always done, faster and cheaper. That's the lowest risk option here. Why would we want to do anything different? That's too risky. So
Very interesting, John.
I'll just mention too, back to purpose and narrative. I believe that the challenge is most companies, when they talk about purpose, are talking about it as their purpose, their company's purpose. I think the focus of narrative is not on the company. It's on the people you're serving outside the company. What is the big opportunity for them? And again, that's why I think Apple was so successful with this narrative of think different. But it's within that context, I can then define a purpose. So Apple could define a purpose to say, our purpose is to help people think different. but it's in the context of the narrative, and it's about the people outside versus,
That makes sense. Yeah.
the company itself.
Thank you. Let's move to Nathan, who also has a question.
Hi. Yeah, no, I was going to ask for examples, but I think to be really practical, I wanted to ask. So we have this group, and you got some of our narrative, and we all have our individual narratives, and we maybe want to come to some more organizational narrative. So, like, how would you, like, really practically, like, how would we do that? Like, so because it's a little like I see a lot of the um, it groups through time. I saw watched a video of you talking about Kenya or whatever. I mean, people have really defined reasons for coming together, and we have maybe more emergent reasons for coming together. And but you want to find a narrative, and I think like this will really shape where this group goes. So I'm switching gears a little here to being very practical, and I'm also interested in what narratives might be out in the world. But I heard you say there's not so many. But just to stick to the nuts and bolts of like, what would you recommend we do? Hold workshops or like, how do we do it?
Well, I thought it was a great exercise of getting people to reflect and start to articulate narratives. I think the challenge at this point is how do we bring together these narratives, and how, of all the opportunities that we have identified, and many of the narratives were on similar opportunities, can we come together and synthesize the real opportunity that would be most exciting and meaningful to more people? And then I think that the areas that really would require attention is what are the barriers and obstacles
Mm-hmm.
that are preventing us from achieving that opportunity? And specifically, what's the call to action to others? What action are we asking others to take in order to address this opportunity? And I again, I'll just quickly I mentioned zoom out, zoom in as an approach to strategy. Um, this is an approach to strategy I came across by working with companies in Silicon Valley, some of the most successful technology companies. And the zoom out, zoom in approach to strategy has two different time horizons. One is 10 to 20 years. That's the zoom out. And on that horizon, the question is, what's a really big opportunity that could dwarf anything that we've ever done before? What's that really big opportunity? And then zoom in is in the next 6 to 12 months, what are the 2 or 3 initiatives, no more, 2 or 3 initiatives that we could pursue in the next 6 to 12 months that would have the greatest impact in accelerating our movement towards that opportunity, that long-term opportunity? And so I think back to the context of this group and the narrative. The narrative, it can be very helpful in terms of framing that zoom out big opportunity. But then I think the challenge is zooming in and saying in the next 6 to 12 months, what are the 2 or 3 initiatives, no more, 2 or 3 that we could pursue that would help us to demonstrate progress towards that opportunity and motivate others to come together around it. So I don't know.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you
I'll
so
just
much.
say, sorry,
Yeah.
too, it's complicated. Everything I've worked on is connected in one way or another. One of the reasons I'm so focused on zoom out, zoom in as an approach to strategy is because it's very powerful in shaping emotions. If you can identify a really inspiring, huge opportunity out in the future, that starts to motivate people to want to address it. But most people who are driven by fear are going to be skeptical and say, wait a minute, that's just a fantasy. That's never going to happen. We've got a lot of things going on right now. I can't be distracted. But if you can then show in the next 6 to 12 months tangible progress towards that bigger opportunity, it's no longer a fantasy. It's real. How can I join? How can I become part of this? And it builds that excitement to say, this is worth pursuing. Let's do it together.
Thank you so much, John. I think that you have given us some hints for our next town hall discussion. Gerardo.
Yes, I have two questions and just one thing amplifying. I don't know if you agree, Steve, but at Ericsson, it was very much about my purpose as a leader a lot of times, right? And in one of the courses I did with Hitendra Vadwa and others, I learned that one company that works like you said, John Hagel, the purpose, the vision is about the end user was Southwestern Airlines. I mean, even their vision statement, it's beautiful, but it's you feel that it could be just as well for the customer, right? Not my purpose as a leader. So just a reflection there, because then it becomes a narrative. What everything they pursued, it was cost. I would say, if I remember. That people could afford to travel and things like that. Beautiful, beautiful videos I also attend. But the questions I have is first is about learning platform. So at our community, so we have several tools we use. We use blogs. We believe that is important to articulate a thought, articulate a point of view, especially in this world with X and Twitter and all these very quick linked links sent to each other. And we we aim very much for that, right? Um, and in that sense, at least I believe it's a learning platform. I take almost a new insight every day from other people. Does this qualify as a learning platform? This is my question, right? The iterations we have and so. And the other question that maybe we can discuss is we have now 9 narratives, right? 10 narratives. And one possibility, in my view, is can we make some type of fusion narrative? For instance, I got so inspired by Andrea's narrative when he brought so much technology as a possibility. In his narrative, he had, for instance, that virtual reality and augmented reality, the killer application could be used for how to diminish polarization. You know, so that you could feel the other people's what they feel actually in a war situation, whatever, even if it's artificial. Very intriguing with what we can do nowadays. With I got inspired also by Jenny, your narrative where you bring up love, which I then incorporated slowly with proud to mine. And so this is a thing. And also, I know that you, Hamir Berry, you're working in doing a radar on how we could see the different narratives. Maybe we could discuss that. So very long questions. I stop here, shout my mouse. Sorry for the long question. But first one was then, can we classify as a learning platform what we do? And then the second one, the ways forward with the narratives, maybe a fusion strategy, fusion narrative as one.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think again, I'm not directly familiar with the platform you have, so I don't have the full view of it. But it sounds like it's mainly conversation, mainly discussion, and certainly that it's helpful in terms of learning. But my belief is the most effective learning occurs through action and impact, and seeing, did we achieve the impact that we thought we were going to achieve or not? And what can we do to have even more impact over time? And that's why when I talk about impact groups, these groups coming together in small groups, they're focused on action and impact, not conversation. Yes, they have conversations, but it's about what actions can we take? What actions did we take? What can we learn from the impact that we achieved? How can we evolve those actions over time? And so it's shifting the focus from conversation to action and impact. And I think that's really ultimately the key to unleashing the learning that can go on. And you asked about fusion narratives, and no, I think it's certainly very feasible to take the opportunities as they've been defined by the various participants and see, again, it's a longer conversation and more complicated, but it's the notion, I believe opportunities can be nested within each other. And so you can look at some specific opportunities that have been identified and say, what bigger opportunity are both of those opportunities going to help generate? And how can we focus on that bigger opportunity, but also create platforms or places where people can focus on the more narrow opportunities? And because that's what they're really passionate about, that's what they're really excited about. So I think it's being open to how broad the opportunity can be identified. At one level, the risk is that if you define the opportunity too broad, it just becomes meaningless. I mean, it's just words without any context or content. And so I think that you have to be specific enough, but again, then recognize that there are sub opportunities within that bigger opportunity that could be pursued as well and will help to achieve that bigger opportunity.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
You're making our town hall work much easier because we will do in the town hall. Johan.
Yes, I raised my hand to ask about or bring forward a specific narrative question. I will come back to that. But first, I would like to answer you, Geraldo, because unfortunately, I don't think we have a learning platform in that sense in our community yet. There is a lot of sharing of existing knowledge. So whatever you learn is already existing knowledge. We are not synthesizing knowledge. And that's something that we aspire to do, I think, but we are not there yet. It's a very hard thing to do. The other thing, when you talk about, do mix and do fusion with narratives, now I come closer to your question or comment, John. I think I see two types of meta-narratives in the society today. One is that, yes, we have both are sort of, yes, we have a problem, let's solve that. One is along the lines, we will solve that by more economic activity, more technology, more growth, right? That's the growth-based narrative that we have lived for a long time. And that's where I think all are raised and born as individuals, as corporate professionals, because that's the corporate narrative. The other narrative is the more, the planetary boundaries type of thing, where there is this perhaps oil and water type of thing. They're not mixable, right? There's actually a divide. Do you think that you can solve the problem by more, or do you actually need to solve the problem by some kind of less, right? Which is I don't think it's a fear-based narrative, but it's a different type of opportunity narrative. And that's sort of one tension, I think, in the society. And the question that I would like to frame or observation is that most of the narrative versus story conversation we had today is in a very sort of distinct time frame. It's now we are working in the corporate era or whatever, right? But once in a while, the civilization comes to a very meta transformational era, right? If you look in the rear mirror, it's easier to see that. But when industrialization happened, that was a great shift, right, from an agriculture type of society to an industrial society, and that's a long topic in itself. But in such shifts, is there a need for some other type of narrative to help people overcome the fear of leaving the old, agriculture or whatever into this unknown industrial, but also to avoid the unintended consequences with the new thing that you can't stop? Is that a different type of narrative? How do you make this change that needs to happen, but no way, so you don't mess things up? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think for sure it's again, it takes effort and thought to really reflect on what is the opportunity, what are the negative consequences that could emerge from that opportunity, how do we block those and focus on the opportunity side, Absolutely. I think that's all part of the reflection and conversation to get people really excited to say, this is an opportunity, and the downside is not going to happen because we're taking action to prevent it from happening. I don't know. I will also mention I don't want to be interpreted as dismissing stories and just focusing on narratives. I go back to my example of Apple Computer. One of the things that made their narrative so powerful and effective was they kept telling stories about people who had thought different and what amazing things they had accomplished. And so it inspired people to say, this isn't just a fantasy. There are people who are actually doing this and accomplishing amazing things. So stories can be very powerful and effective in the context of a narrative to illustrate the potential and what actions were taken and what results were achieved. And it's what we can learn from those people.
Very interesting to connect many things together, as you just mentioned, and
Yeah.
understand how the dots join. We have one more question from Andreas. John, we are taking away your time. I don't know if you have time for more. Are you okay taking us at least one more question?
Oh, yeah. No, we had until the bottom of the hour. Another 13 minutes, I think.
Perfect. Thank you. Andreas. I cannot hear you.
Okay.
Now I think we can.
No one is talking right now. I'm talking.
No. Andreas, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now, maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So, as I was reflecting on the, narrative and what it contains and what it doesn't contain throughout the course of this presentation, I thought of some spiritual traditions from the East, where there's an analogy of the three types of buckets of ignorance, or kind of how people are either fit vessels or not, right? So one of the buckets is upside down, which is kind of whatever you pour onto it or into it kind of just flows, and it's like pouring water on a goose, right? The other one is a bucket with holes in it, so everything just kind of drains out of it over time or quite quickly, right? The third one is where a single drop of poison will actually spoil the entire content of the bucket, right? So, so in the context of narratives, I've seen narratives used mostly for marketing and communication purposes, but there's nothing really kind of the content behind it. It's just empty, right? I don't know if you kind of have any kind of thoughts on that, because establishing a narrative, yeah, there's a purpose, right? But I'm thinking that it should be free from any kind of marketing or communication, but those might be kind of side effects. Or what are your thoughts on that?
No, it's an important observation. I think one of the challenges when we talk about narratives in companies is it gets handed over to the marketing executives to say, give me a marketing pitch that I can use to attract more customers. And the challenge is, is it really favoring the customer or is it favoring the company? And what actions are we asking the customer to take that it is not buy my product? I think the interesting thing about, again, I go back to the Apple narrative of think different. It wasn't buy Apple products. It was think different. And that required some real effort for most people who were just captured in the cubicles that they were in. So it's again, I think at the end of the day, the narratives can be very helpful for marketing, but the narratives have to be focused on the customer and what the customer needs to do besides buying my product. What's the bigger opportunity, the bigger context for them, and what actions do they need to take in order to do it? I'll just give you one other example that comes to mind. It's Nike, the sports shoe manufacturer. Nike had a narrative which was basically condensed into the slogan of "Just do it." But it was this notion that for decades we've been captured in societies where our physical wellness and being is irrelevant. It's all about just sitting at the desk doing what you're told to do. Um, and there's an untapped opportunity to bring back our physical wellness and health, but you need to just do it. You can't just sit at the desk. You got to go out and run. You got to go out and exercise. You got to go out and do things. And again, it wasn't buy our product. Yes, that was, a, a second order effect, but it was all about what the customer needed to do in order to achieve the opportunity that was missing, and recognizing there were barriers and obstacles that were preventing them from achieving that. So just do it. Get out there, do it. Anyway, I'd just give that as an example.
Thank you so much. I don't know if Andreas is trying to unmute because I muted you. Sorry. Thank you so much for, now you have it. Oh.
Yeah.
I can see no more questions, even though we've had also a fascinating discussion on the side with our thread. So perhaps we can copy the meeting chat as well and share it with you, John, in case there were some other interesting things that you can and want to review later.
A little quick question, just as the AI in the context of mounting performance pressures,
Yes.
it's not going to help, right? It's just going to be even worse. Or how do you see it? It's going to help in the sense that it alleviates some thinking, or
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I generalize, but when I talk to most executives about AI, they have two questions. How quickly can I automate? And how many jobs can I eliminate? Scalable efficiency,
it's
faster
going to be
and cheaper.
efficient. Yes.
And I think it's one of the things that's feeding the fear of employees, is they increasingly see that that's what their leaders and bosses are wanting to do with this AI technology. It's get rid of them, fire them, versus what if we looked at AI as an opportunity to restore our humanity, to take the work that we've been doing as human beings, which is tightly specified, highly standardized tasks, which we never should have been done as human beings, give them to the machines to do, and free us up to focus on this form of learning and the creating new knowledge to create more value for the stakeholders and people we're addressing.
Yes.
I'll just quickly give an example, because I think it's an interesting illustration. It's a clinical laboratory company. In the customer service department, they were experiencing increasing customer unhappiness. Customers were leaving their business. Employees in the call center department were leaving the business because they were unhappy. The head of the department called all their people together in their call center operations and said, first thing is, I'm promising none of you are going to lose your jobs. You'll all have your jobs. Your first assignment is go work with the technology department to figure out how you can automate all those routine calls that you're consuming all your time with, and free up your time from those routine calls. Then I'm going to organize you into small groups. He called them pods. that to focus on the most difficult, challenging questions that you've never seen before and come up with creative answers for those questions. Customer satisfaction went way up. Call center employee satisfaction went way up. There's an opportunity. You know, if we were focusing on AI to do that versus just get rid of people, we could accomplish a lot more.
Totally agree. Johan, you have
Yes, I have an offer to you, John. When the executives ask you those questions, what should I do with AI, or how can I implement it, and how many jobs can I get rid of? You should actually offer a fear-based mirror, because executives are not stupid, usually at least. And if your organization can take out so much cost with this efficiency gain, I mean, AI and especially the latest generations are really great at driving efficiency. What will happen with your cost base? And what will happen with your competitors' cost base, because they will do the same? And what will your customers say when your cost base goes down? What will happen with your pricing on this competitive market you're on? And with that, what will happen with your addressable market? That's a let's go west type of opportunity based. Yes, AI is great, but it will make us need to move in a different direction. And to do that, you need to have the employees with you potentially. Does that make sense?
No, again, my focus would be on the opportunity. I think there's incredible opportunity to create much more value than was ever achieved before. Again, I go back to exponentially expanding opportunity. We can create far more value with far less resource, far more quickly, but we have to think about the opportunity and the value and the impact versus just the cost. If it's all about just cutting costs, that's a diminishing returns game.
Yeah, but
cost
with the classic metrics, cutting cost is an opportunity, right? It's seen as an opportunity in many cases, isn't it?
Yeah. No, and again, for over a century, it's created huge value in large organizations around the world. So it's hard to challenge. But again, if the world is changing, maybe we need a different approach. Maybe that's no longer going to create the value that we want or need.
really fascinating discussion, honestly. But in the diminishing value aspect of what you were saying, that's also another tricky thing. There was one very interesting analysis and report by McKinsey some years ago, showing that the digital transformation in itself was decreasing the value of all the industries, except for the two or three leaders in any industry that were doing better. But in general, in average, everyone was losing value because they couldn't charge more to their customers and they were costing still a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah. Again, I would say that that's the result of scalable efficiency.
Exactly.
Scalable efficiency, fewer and fewer companies who have the scale and the efficiency, everybody else loses, versus scalable learning, where I think more and more companies can thrive and survive.
John, thank you
Great.
so
I think
much.
that we have covered a lot.
Yes.
Joe. Thank you so much.
Joe, I would like to thank you for this gift. I will send you a formal invitation to join our community. Many of the guests do that, so I hope you find you also found the conversations of interest, and we'll be working with the narratives now, right? With a town hall in May, and thank you so much. I sincerely hope we stay in touch.
I would certainly welcome further feedback and questions. I'm constantly wanting to learn more myself, and so I learn a lot from the questions that I get. So thank you. And if you have a chance to read my book, The Journey Beyond Fear, I would certainly feedback on that. Well,
yes.
We will.
Thank you. Thanks,
We
everybody.
have watched
We'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your conversation today.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.